Hello everyone, and welcome to the second iteration of the True Dhamma lecture, following in the footsteps of the Buddha. My name is Dr. Florian Lau, and I'm the founder of the Dhamma Hub. And this is, as mentioned before, the second time around that I am doing or recording this lecture, 2 years later, compared to the first version. And today we start with a short overview. First of all, I will present you a short introduction to the entire topic and why I decided to reshoot this lecture. Then I will tell you a bit about myself, and for those people who do not know me, then I give you a few resources where you can read up more about the style of Dhamma that I'm teaching here on the channel. And then I give you a brief overview over what to expect through the course of this lecture. At the bottom, at the slides, you can see a small progress bar until the first blue bar is the progress of this lecture, and then for all the other ones you will see wherever we are at any point in time. But let us first start with a short introduction on why I plan on or am currently reshooting this lecture. Well, first, again, welcome to my independent and updated lecture on early Buddhism and Dhamma. I find this very important to mention because I do not feel any, allegiance, or however you want to phrase it, to any of the major schools of Buddhism nowadays. I'm not a Theravada Buddhist, I'm not a Mahayana Buddhist, and I'm not a Vajrayana Buddhist, and I'm not feeling any connection to any of the major schools nowadays. I simply try to understand, practice, and teach the Dhamma according to the earliest known Buddhist texts in the Pali Canon. I know some of those in the Pali Canon are very likely older than the others, but still, I very likely try to present whatever knowledge I have here in line with all the suttas in the entire canon and not just a subset of those. I really try to give you an interpretation of the teachings of the Buddha that are without contradiction, like an open hand, not like a closed fist. And then I want to upload the videos, this time around bi-weekly, since I updated the upload schedule of the entire channel. But this also means that I will only shoot one video per chapter. I'm not splitting the larger chapters into like 3 pieces or anything. I will just record everything in one go and then upload it. So it will be like 12 videos in total, including this introductory slide deck. So 12 big chapters, including one organization slide deck, means 12 videos in total. And the content overall should be roughly 20 to 24 hours in total, depending on how quickly I speak. And then we have all kinds of materials that are likely not so common in other styles of presenting the Buddha Dhamma. I give you lots of interactive experiments, and I have updated them according to the knowledge I have accumulated over the past 2 years. I give you some illustrations, some are new, some I have removed from the lecture series, and as well as lots of thought experiments, contemplations, similes from the suttas, and sometimes just quotations from the suttas. And at any given point in time, I will try to give you the sutta itself, or a link to the sutta itself, either as a QR code or as a clickable link in the slide deck that you can probably download from the video description. And yeah, in that case, you can just check for yourself what is in the suttas, because sometimes I translate certain terms in a way that is not so common, simply because I feel that it suits the original spirit of the suttas much better. This includes terms like mindfulness, that I simply try to translate as remembering. Like the suttas say, sati just means remembering, and I do not try to find esoteric double meanings that sometimes apply and sometimes don't. I simply try to use each word according to its meaning. And sometimes it means a different thing according to the context. That's not the problem. But I still try to represent sati as remembering, or sankhara as foundation of, or based on, or something like that. And you will see that when those terms arise and we discuss them in more depth. But in short, I want to present the timeless Dhamma that the Buddha has discovered in modern words and using relatable similes for people who have no background when it comes to Dhamma, or for people who wish to have a fresh start when it comes to the entire Dhamma business because they feel stuck or something. Because in the end, I did go on philosophical or computer science tangents in the past, in the first iteration, but this time around I want to make it as easy as possible, as easily digestible as possible, as simple as possible. I see no benefit in overcomplicating the Dhamma. The instructions that the Buddha gave are actually exceptionally simple. They are not easy to implement, but they should be easy and simple to understand, given that you bring the right preconditions to the table. Yeah. And everything in this lecture should be covered in the right order in which you should practice. So I try to present you everything in the order in which you need the knowledge to understand everything else. Most Dhamma talks that you can find online usually presuppose quite a bit of knowledge, and I want to change that. I want to at least give you one format that is without any preliminaries that you have to understand beforehand. Yeah. Okay, anyway, let us dive into the content a bit more. Here I have given you a short meme that you can have a look at why meditation and liberation might be beneficial. Because as you see, there are all kinds of ailments and problems in the world. It's full of fake news, politics, death, envy, depression, illness, and all kinds of other things. You might not become the observer, which is also something that is not the goal, but you want to be free from suffering. So even if those things stay in the world, even if there's lots of depression, lots of stress, even war, lust, envy, all those bad emotions, you want to be still at ease. You want to still be liberated. You want to not suffer no matter what happens. This is the liberation that the Buddha was talking about. It's not that you retreat onto the meditation cushion and then are free while you meditate. You want to be free all the time, no matter what happens. This is what true freedom is like. This is the freedom and the liberation that the Buddha was talking about. It is unconditioned. It's not limited to any specific situation. You have this kind of liberation no matter if you stand, walk, talk, lie down, sleep, whatever the situation, you are liberated all the time. Yeah, and why this lecture again? There are multiple reasons, by the way. And one of those reasons is that many practices are falsely attributed to the Buddha. Many of the modern practices even that are recipe-like, where you try to follow certain approaches and methods, those cannot really be traced back to the suttas. You can, with a lot of interpretation, try to find justification for such practices in the Pali Canon, but I think there's a lot of mental gymnastics involved. And many of the methods that the suttas do explain, even though it's not too fitting to call those methods at all, are often misunderstood or misrepresented. And there's often a conflict with the original teachings, and parts of the teachings are often ignored to make a certain method fit. So I want to clean up many of those misconceptions and many of those contradictions and conflicts. And I want to introduce precise explanations that are not mystic. So I really want to make this simple and give you a coherent interpretation of the suttas that works. And when it comes to that approach, hard sciences, I'm a scientist, as you will soon find out, and Buddhism are surprisingly in line. And Dhamma is logical, as the Buddha said. It should be logical. It should not be too mystic. It should be checkable by logic. And I, at some point, set out to find the core of the Dhamma, or the hardwood, the essential part. The part that does all the work without all the fluff or the overly specific aspects. I don't want to focus too much on the look and feel and all the rituals. I simply want to give you the essentials. And I want to give dedicated beginners everything they need for solo practice, because I'm very much convinced that you can reach the first stage of liberation pretty much on your own. You don't need to go on fancy retreats or all those things. You can do it at home on your own if you wish. All those things can be very beneficial, no question about it. But yeah, and there's also a personal wish of mine to keep the true Dhamma alive, and maybe other people can have an easier time understanding all those things than I had. It took me many years to accumulate all this knowledge and to align my own practice much more with the style of practice that the Buddha very likely did back in the days. And I don't want to bash other traditions. This is very important. I just point out what is most likely true to the original without contradictions. I teach the Dhamma for those who wish to listen. If you don't wish to listen to me, that is perfectly fine. If you are triggered by what I say here, that's fine. I'm really not trying to explain any Dhamma content for those people who don't want to listen, or who have a mind of fault-finding, as the Buddha, as the Sutta sometimes say. Those people can practice whatever they wish. The Buddha even said himself that he only teaches for those who wish to learn. He only teaches the gateway to Nibbana for those who wish to go the same way as he did. If people do not want that, that's fine. The Buddha pointed out the way, but people have to go it, well, by themselves. And this is very important. Yeah. And now, why did I update this lecture? Well, first of all, my understanding of the Dhamma advanced over time. I have now a better understanding than I had 2 years ago. The core of it all was already there 2 years ago, but the way of phrasing the Dhamma has changed quite significantly. I do acknowledge, as an example, that the audience changes all the time, and I'm no longer happy with some of the content that I have given you. So I want to gradually refine things, and I did gradually refine things over time. And the second attempt is likely better than before, and I have much more teaching experience now. There are new subscribers, old ones who rarely watch the older videos, and version 1.0 still had some of the self-improvement connection and content that I left behind at that time. So as you might remember, there was still background music, there was still a different logo and everything, and only in the third or fourth lecture I did change to the new design. So it's better to redo the lecture from time to time, just to keep everything updated, just like I do certain lectures at university every single year. This one every other year, or when I feel like I should update it. But it's still a good thing to do, in my opinion. Yeah, but let's continue. So what are the modern problems that we are facing in the Dhamma practitioner community? First, the Buddha mentioned that the Dhamma should be like an open hand and not like a closed fist. There are many traditions who at least act like they are basing their teachings on secret teachings that the Buddha only gave to his very special followers, like a Kassapa or something. And some schools even portray Sariputta, the general of the Dhamma, as the Buddha said, as pretty much laughable character that was just there for the Buddha to display, you can do it like that, but here's a much better way, and I don't give it to you, or something like that. Buddha never said something along those lines. And then there are countless word problems. There are words with multiple meanings that mean something entirely different today than they meant back then. One of those words is mindfulness, as mentioned before. In modern traditions, it often means that you watch your sensations and your body very closely and try to not miss any moment or something like that, or that you closely inspect. In the suttas, the word simply means remembering. You remember the teachings. You try to watch your intentions as your teacher might have told you so. This is how mindfulness works. Mindfulness means remembering, and you obviously can do that in very different contexts. But it's good to have the knowledge that those words can mean different things to different people. And if you know that, you can teach them in a better way. Otherwise, you will very likely speak about one thing and they will understand it in a very different way. Then we have an even worse aspect. There are lots of contradictions with the Buddha's lectures, with the Buddha suttas. Sometimes people just pick a tiny number of suttas and try to use them as justification that whatever method they teach is in line with the suttas, but only with one of them and not with all of them. And the suttas, as I see it, or when I compare the sutta approach with some modern approaches, those are oftentimes no longer good in the beginning, middle, and end. The word virtue is gravely misrepresented, and I will dedicate an entire lecture, chapter number 5, to this very specific topic. And there's also a problem that we have mixed up the terms weakening craving and uprooting craving quite significantly. The Buddha Dhamma is all about the uprooting of craving, the inability of future suffering to arise, and not so much about the absence of suffering. I mean, you can be free from suffering, the Buddha said so, as an unenlightened person for your entire lifetime, and even beyond. But you would still not be liberated in the ultimate sense. And then there's problems with the Visuddhimagga interpretations on dependent origination. And in this case, I will make an exception and call them wrong. I don't say that this is a valid teaching because I don't think it is. And I think it's quite harmful. The dependent origination teachings are those teachings that are special to the Buddhas, according to the suttas. And the way the Buddha portrayed them is nothing like the Visuddhimagga book portrays those teachings. And the same is true for the absorption jhanas in the same book. And then there are also wrong understandings when it comes to the term impermanence. For example, in the modern Mahayana schools. But this is true for many schools, and not just for one or something like that. Pretty much all the major schools, as I understand it. I have not read up too much on the topic. Again, I'm a one-trick pony when it comes to Sutta Buddhism. But there are universally major flaws in all the modern schools. Yeah. And it happens that people discover a specific new method and discard everything else. And they kind of miss the big picture, which is kind of a shame. You want to be in line with all the teachings when you try to find a new approach and don't skip certain things, because that is really working. So yeah, what do I plan on doing to fix those shortcomings that I have identified? First, this lecture does several things differently. I use many visual elements to illustrate and explain more complicated ideas. Lots of small experiments and similes so that you can get an intuition on a topic and test your understanding. Because more often than not, it is quite easy to give you an intuitive understanding of what craving is, of what suffering is, even though those terms are heavily misrepresented nowadays. There are sometimes guided meditations to ease you off your old meditation techniques that you could do if you wish to practice more in line with the sutta, but want to do that following a more gradual approach. And I give you citations to the source text with modern explanations, have little to no prerequisites, and I order all those methods and approaches on a bigger picture and on a timeline. And I hope that those teachings are pragmatic and free from contradictions with the suttas. And I will also give you the life story of the Buddha so that you can also relate a bit more to the way he was teaching. I think the history is quite important to understand, especially when it comes to the more controversial parts of the teaching, why he chose to teach the way he did. But now a little bit about myself, the presenter. I'm Dr. Florian Lau from Germany, and at the time of recording this video, I am 34 years old in 2024. I am a theoretical and very rarely a practical computer scientist. I mean, I do work with computers, but I like the mathematical models and stuff better. I am also a dedicated practitioner of the Dhamma, an author, a scientist, and well, since I produce videos on YouTube, I'm also a YouTuber, I guess. I create exclusively content on Dhamma nowadays, on virtue and on Buddhism in general. But I really try to at least give you some Dhamma, some practice instructions in basically every video. And this applies to Buddhist meditation, science, and I use all those principles from Buddhism and science and apply that sometimes to modern problems. But what I present here is not mere management. It's not a method that you do to counteract your suffering or something that you do in response. This really is about your inability to suffer in the future. I do have a background in self-improvement, so sometimes I will give you content from that time, let's put it like that. But most of the time, this is about virtue and about Dhamma. Yeah, this is my curriculum vitae. I'm born in Germany, in Lübeck. I have grown up in the countryside and spent most of my time there, at least the first 10 years or something like that. After that, I got my first Game Boy and spent way too much time playing video games, but still managed to finish my Abitur in 2009. This is probably the German equivalent to a high school degree or something. At that time, I was began playing way too many video games, and I did that for a very long time until I finally decided to stop in like 2020 or something. So this is not too far in the past. In 2030, I finished my bachelor thesis. In 2060, my master. And in 2020, I finished my PhD thesis. And now I am a postdoctoral scientist at the Institute of Telematics in Lübeck. And I'm the author of many books, some on nanoscience, this is my research topic, some on meditation, some on self-improvement, some on finances, some on lifting weights or something like that. I had a habit in the past of writing a book on everything that I was currently researching so that I can also help other people. And I'm currently working on my habilitation, which is just the piece of paper that allows you to be a professor at university in Germany. Yeah, and I also administrate an online Sangha together with 3 other very charming and very knowledgeable administrators. And I'm the main creator on the Dhamma Hub. And sometimes I also invite Saif here to answer certain questions in depth or sometimes even short with me, who is also extremely knowledgeable on the Dhamma. So if there are videos uploaded with him, I very much invite you to watch them and to try to digest what is in there. When it comes to meditation experience, I got into the Dhamma when I was like 27 or 20 years old, and rather forcefully. My father at that time was dying due to cancer, and this was not a very nice experience. And this really taught me firsthand that sensuality cannot make your suffering go away, even though that is the only approach that we usually know as unenlightened people. And at that time, I decided or discovered Buddhism and meditation, and I went all in. I really practiced like my hair was on fire back then and made lots of progress very quickly simply because it was a matter of vital concern. And now I have more than half a decade of experience when it comes to Buddhism and pretty much dedicated my entire life to the practice of Buddhism. I have read all those suttas, all the texts, the early Buddhist texts there are, including the Majjhima Nikaya, Digha Nikaya, and all the others. And also the code of conduct for monks and nuns, the poems and everything else pretty much. And I have also read dozens of other meditation books. And yeah, overall, I am still rather limited when it comes to my knowledge, as I have only really educated myself on early Buddhism. So whenever you have questions concerning other major traditions, I cannot answer those, and I will not. I can sometimes speculate, but I will very much tell you that I'm only speculating here. So yeah, but overall, I also bring some computer science to the table, as that is a science of processes and procedures, and it's pretty much the science of how to understand and achieve something step by step. And this is rather good for teaching, as I understand it. And as I also teach at university, I hopefully can also use that for teaching here, so that you can benefit from that too. And the Buddha perfected both things, teaching and wisdom. And that is a very rare combination. Just because you have wisdom does not mean that you are a good teacher. There are Sotapannas, and this is probably a very unpopular take, who are not very good at teaching, who say wrong things about the Dhamma because they don't understand them. Those people exist. And even in the suttas, there are some cases where people, sometimes even advanced monks, have been called fools or mahapugala, big fools, by the Buddha, because they have been misrepresenting the Dhamma. And they were unwilling sometimes to give up their wrong ideas. Now I still want to give you a bit of a resource collection that you can read if you want to get into this style of practice more. And the first thing I would recommend is a simple collection of suttas that portrays the life story of the Buddha with the most important discourses ordered by the very likely occurrence. And this is from Bhikkhu Nanamoli, The Life of the Buddha. And then I would recommend you my own book, as it is similar to this lecture, something that you can very likely read without much prerequisite. It's called Science and Buddhism Aligned. You can find it for free somewhere linked in the description or on the channel banner or something. And then I also can recommend some parts of Ayakema's videos and books. I think she had great wisdom, even though I do not agree with her take on the absorption jhanas that she did teach. The same is true for Bhante Gunaratana Hellepola's books. I also base some of the knowledge here on Ajahn Yanamolitero's books and videos. Some knowledge on the talks of Ajahn Chah. Again, I very much respect his talks on wisdom, but I don't think that his talks on concentration are too beneficial. And he even says so sometimes himself, that it's sometimes much better to spend time in access concentration, which would very likely, as I understand it, a state without hindrances, than to spend time in jhana. And then there are many discussions on our Discord server and some wisdom from our meditation teacher that I use as a guide to explain the Dhamma to you. And if you miss some general knowledge when it comes to science, I can really recommend The Science of the Discworld, which is a very simple way of explaining scientific principles. Or if you are interested in philosophy, I can recommend to you A New History of Western Philosophy. But I will caution you that it's usually not a good idea to go too deep into the philosophy stuff. I don't think that's too beneficial. You should really focus on putting in the work of renunciation. And we will learn a lot more about that later. Now to a short reading guide. You can also read certain books from other teachers. And in this case, for beginners, I really like to recommend Ayakema and Bhanteji. They write in a very inspiring way, even though, again, I don't agree with their teachings on concentration. But the rest is still pretty good. In my book, then, for example, The Only Way to Jhana by Nana Molitero, if you have biases when it comes to concentration meditation and are clinging to your views when it comes to that, on the cushion-bound style of concentration meditation, then that's a very good book. And I very much agree with this style of concentration, because that is in line with the suttas. Then you can read The Life of the Buddha, either as a first book or as a fourth. And then I think you have a very good foundation to start reading the earliest Buddhist texts, all the Nikayas, the Vijnana, the rules for monks and nuns, and all those things. All books are very beneficial, especially when you want to understand the cultural background of those rules that sometimes don't seem to make sense nowadays. Like, why should I not take garlic as a monk or nun? Well, you will find out when you read those books, even though those rules do not seem to make sense nowadays. People still abide by them, and it's probably a good idea. Okay, here we have a few more video sources that you can look up. First is the Hillside Hermitage channel. There's the Buddha House and Metavihara channel that contains lots of talks from Ayakema, both in German and in English, but mainly German, because it is a German channel, and Ayakema decided to teach mainly in German in her last days. She started very late and died comparably early to cancer. But in that time where she was very active, she was giving very inspiring talks that sometimes can move you to tears. Then there's another channel, which is called 1983 Dukkha, which gives you lots of talks from Ajahn Chah, read by, I think, Bhikkhu Sumeru, but I'm not completely sure. I have watched all those videos and I find those talks quite inspiring too. But again, you always have to listen to those with a grain of salt, especially when it comes to the concentration techniques. I do think that those are very much wrong. I do think that both Ayya Khema and Ajahn Chah did practice the real concentration, as mentioned by the Buddha, but they did not call it like that. They called it differently. There's the absorption style of concentration, and then there's the culmination of the teaching style of concentration. And I really think that the suttas portray the latter. Culmination of the teaching, the concentration that is there all the time, and not just sometimes. Okay, and now to a short overview of the entire course. First, some prerequisites are necessary, even though I try to minimize them. You should be able to think logically, at least a bit, and free from biases. You should reason a bit and see if what I say here makes sense in your own experience. You should bring patience and the ability to delay your disbelief. And you should bring the willingness to invest some effort and put things to the test. Those are instructions here. You must do those things and realize them in your own experience. You need intellectual self-honesty for that. If you are not honest with yourself, radically honest even, then there will not be any progress for you. And you need an urge to find liberation. And this should be a matter of vital concern to you. Otherwise, you will only half-heartedly practice. Most people need an external motivation for that. But sometimes people are lucky enough so that they can practice just because they wish to. And you also need the ability to stomach criticism and to stomach views that might go against what you think to be true. Because what I display here is very likely not in line with the views of many people here. And you probably, and very likely even, need a strong experience of the inevitability of suffering in your life. Without a divine messenger, most people will not practice. And again, I try to presuppose next to nothing. And here is the syllabus, just the order of chapters as I wish to progress in the future. First, there's this video here that introduces all the organizational stuff and why I do things. Then a short discourse on Buddhism and science, the motivation for beginners, then the historic settings, the divine messenger event, and the going forth to the Dhamma, which is not necessarily meaning that you will become a monk. It just means that you go forth to the Dhamma and dedicate your life towards Buddhism. Then a chapter on the mundane right view that clears up all the baggage that you have to get rid of to actually start practicing the Dhamma correctly. Then a chapter entirely on virtue, as this is very likely the majority of the practice that you should do before stream entry. Then another chapter on wisdom and what stream entry even means. Then a chapter on jhana or samadhi. Then a chapter on how to practice beyond sotappatti, beyond stream entry. Then a chapter on formal meditation techniques and contemplations and how you can make those more right. You sometimes can use those methods, even though they are not mentioned in the suttas, and for some people they work. They are just not universally true. And this is very important. And in the end, there's a summary and some personal examples that I will give you from my own practice to give you an understanding of how things worked out for me. And the lecture structure of each chapter is pretty much always the same. I start with a short recap of what we have done before. Then there's an overview, a 5-minute optional meditation that you can just skip. I will just invite you to do that, simply because it's much easier and much more fruitful to understand Dhamma based on a mind that is free from the hindrances, based on a glad mind. If your mind is gladdened and free from stress, then you can understand the Dhamma. Gladness and joy is a precondition to see the Dhamma. And this is very important. If you are not glad in the moment, then you can't understand the Dhamma. Whenever the Buddha guided someone to stream entry, he first, as the very first step, gladdened the mind of such a person. So by all means, glad your mind before you try to listen to this talk. This is important. Then there's some content, a story time, much more content, experiments, similes, and all those things. A short summary, additional resources, an invitation to post questions below that Saif and I can answer in different videos. And then at the bottom there's the orange progress bar that I have mentioned. And now a short disclaimer, and I find this very important. First, I am not a monk. I'm not an official meditation teacher. No one authorized me by official means to teach the Dhamma or anything like that. I do this because I want to do this. I'm not affiliated with anyone. Listen to what I say here at your own risk. If you think it makes sense, great. Try to put things into practice and see if it works. See if it makes suffering for you impossible. But yeah, it's nothing official here. There's no lineage that has given me official permission to do this. I just do this because I want to do it, because I have compassion. And first, I do point out many contradictions with popular modern traditions when it comes to the Buddha's suttas. Be prepared for that, and be prepared that it feels bad. Having your views challenged always feels bad, and this is also a good way to assess your own progress. Does it feel bad to have your views challenged? If it doesn't sting a bit, then it's perfectly fine, and you're probably very advanced. But if it hurts to listen to some of those things I say because they go against your understanding of the Dhamma, then it's very likely that there are still things that you are missing. And I am aware that the presented information here goes against the Abhidhamma, the Visuddhimagga, and many of the modern schools of meditation. I do quite openly invite you to listen to a different interpretation of the early suttas. And I do limit myself to the original teachings, and I only wish to practice in line with those. If this is not your wish, this is perfectly fine. You don't have to. The Buddha only invited people to practice the Dhamma. He suggested to them to practice the Dhamma. But they had to do it. And if they did not want to do it, they did not do it, which is also perfect fine. And as a last point, it's good to try and avoid a shortcut mindset. Patience is one of the highest virtue in Buddhism, and without patience, you will not make much progress. Okay, and here's some last remarks. Dhamma means going against the grain. It is often uncomfortable. It means renunciation. It means going against the grain of the world. It means going against your feelings. This is very important. And this is also true for seasoned practitioners. If you see yourself challenged in your views, that's a good sign that there is some remaining work. I also record every lecture in one go without any editing. And this is roughly 700 to 777 slides long. So bear with my hopefully small mistakes and feel free to point them out. If there are any, I will gladly correct them. And sometimes the slides can be a bit crowded. I do that to also use those slides as a script, as bullet points that you can use. And feel free to give me feedback and comments below. If something is not agreeing with you or you think that I made a mistake, feel free to point it out. I will consider it and maybe adjust my views or my way of presenting things. And after the very last lecture, I will answer all the novel questions in other videos with Saif. So feel free to ask and comment below. Okay, again, if there are questions, feel free to put them below. And here's the last slide that I will give you every time. If you wish to support me, you can do so on Patreon or find my books on Amazon as an example. I self-publish them there because I don't want to go to any of the major publishing houses. Maybe I will consider contacting Pars Press or some other publisher at some point in the future, but who knows? And then there's a Dhamma Discord server. If you wish to practice more in line with this style of teaching, then there's a community of like-minded people. But yeah, apart from that, I have nothing more to say for the first lecture. I wish you a pleasant day and goodbye.